By Congressman Tom Cole, Republican from Oklahoma. Always good to see you, Congressman. Good morning.
Hey, great to be with you, Chris.
Thanks for being with us this day after Easter. And I want to get your reaction to what the vice president had to say. And I wonder if you're worried that the ratcheting up of rhetoric, both by him and, frankly, the president, some of the things that he said on Twitter, could be inching us toward, frankly, a devastating and avoidable war.
Well, frankly, I'm more worried about the leadership in North Korea. I think they're the people that have been provocative, reckless, and frankly unpredictable. And in a situation like that, I think, putting up a strong front, making it clear that the United States won't be intimidated, that it has the capacity to act, is exactly the right thing to do. And I think that's probably quietly being reinforced by the Chinese, which I give, again, President Trump and Vice President Pence a great credit for.
I mean, obviously, the problem with that, we were talking about this a little earlier, is that when you look at a lot of the military options, you've got to worry about the impact on Seoul. You've got to worry about American military on the ground. It limits what we can do. What do you think our strategy should be right now? Do you agree with what you've seen so far from the Trump administration?
Well, I do. And look, I think General McCaffrey has always had it exactly right. This is not a war we want to fight. This is not a confrontation that would be in the interest of South Korea, our friend. I think the other side needs to be absolutely certain that if we're drawn into a conflict, we will act decisively. And I think there are probably voices inside North Korea, other than the supreme leader, that are telling him, look, don't get into this fight. And again, I go back to the Chinese, and I'm glad that President Trump reached out to them recently in his meeting with the president of China, because I suspect they're probably being a voice of moderation here, and that's helpful.
I know you talked about this after the president took action following the gassing of his own people by Assad in Syria. But now when there is this talk about potentially doing something in North Korea, and you guys are off for the next week, but you'll be coming back to Washington next week, do you need to look at another AUMF? Does the president need to come to Congress and talk about this before it reaches a critical situation?
In terms of Syria, absolutely so. Look, I felt this way for several years. I thought President Obama made a mistake in not getting new authorization. Certainly, if we were to go into any sort of sustained action in Syria, you would need that. In the case of North Korea, of course, we would simply be carrying out our treaty obligations. Now, again, I don't think anybody wants a conflict in the Korean Peninsula, and I think the great powers in the region, ourselves and the Chinese, certainly don't want that. So if something were to start, I think it would be needlessly provoked by North Korea.
Let's talk domestic politics, if we can. Now, the election to replace Tom Price in Georgia's 6th has been said to be a referendum on President Trump, and the polls now show that the Democrat, Jon Ossoff, is a front runner. But if he doesn't get above 50%, and I think that's a long shot there, obviously there's going to be a runoff. You're the former chairman of the NRCC. How do you see this playing out?
Well, I think Democrats have a lot of advantage. Look, they're united, they're energized, they have essentially unlimited resources to fight this special election, and frankly, they've got the kind of district that would be the most likely to flip. Having said that, I think they've got a candidate that's positioned too far to the left. He's not from the district. He really is an outsider there. And by nationalizing the election so early, they certainly have given both local and national Republicans a lot of time to prepare and go after him. So my guess is we hold him below 50. We've got then until June, and I think over time we end up winning the seat. But no question it'll be very contentious. Oh, not win it on Tuesday night. Right. I mean, I think we hold him under 50 and then win it, I think in June is when June 20th, if I remember correctly, would be the final election. But it's absolutely critical we hold him below 50. So we need a high turnout amongst Republicans, regardless of who they vote for, as long as they're voting for the Republican candidates. We need that kind of turnout, because the Democrats certainly will have a very high turnout.
Over the weekend, we got a couple of developments having to do with transparency. You have those protests around the country, but President Trump still refuses to release his tax return. The other aspect, the White House's announcement that they're not going to make visitor logs public. This is a president who promised transparency. Is he breaking that promise?
Well, I wouldn't say he's breaking a promise, but look, I would disagree on the White House visitors logs. That information is going to get out there anyway.
Yeah, but not until 5 years after he leaves. Do you think that the American people need to know who has the influence there? These are both questions. about influence, really. Who's he meeting with? That's a question of, who's got the time. The question of the taxes, who's on his tax return. These are questions of influence. Who's influencing our president? You don't think that that's a critical question?
No, actually, as I said, I agree with you in terms of the White House logs. If it were my decision, I would just make them available. I don't think anything sinister is happening there. And it's actually less a question of influence. His advisors, whom we know have the most influence, it's a question of access, who's going in and out. And I think that's a fair question. The president's within his rights, but personally, I would advise him to release them. On the tax returns, I have a different point of view. Well, look, if we want to do that, then we need to change the law. He's perfectly within his rights. He's released a full financial statement as required by law. If people want to do something there, then pass the law. It shouldn't be retroactive. You could do that going forward. But again, I don't think you're required, because it's not a requirement of law, to make your personal taxes available to your opponents, so they can savage you with them.
Congressman, it's always good to see you, sir. Thank you so much.
Chris,
see you here in
thank you.
Washington next week.